Hey everyone, and welcome to The Deep Dive. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. And while you're at it, go ahead and tap that notification bell too so you don't miss out on any of our future deep dives. Today we're going to be diving into a topic that affects us all, but it's especially relevant, I think, if you're a UPSC aspirant getting ready for GS3, or maybe a student who just wants to understand the world a little bit better, or even just someone who wants to be prepared for whatever life might throw your way. We talk about disaster risk reduction and India's role in this global effort.
Yeah, that's right. We often hear about reacting to disasters, after they happen. But today we're kind of flipping the script and we're going to talk about how to prevent them in the first place.
Exactly. Being proactive,
Yeah.
building resilience. I know that some of you might be thinking, okay, disaster risk reduction, that sounds kind of heavy, but trust me, this is going to be anything but boring. We've got some fascinating real-world examples. We've got some mind-blowing strategies. And we've even got some surprising tech innovations that are helping India tackle disaster risk head-on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And to kind of set the stage, let's start with something called the World Risk Index. It was created by the University of Stuttgart, and it analyzes how vulnerable a country is to disasters. It looks at things like infrastructure and socioeconomic conditions.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So where does India actually stand on this index?
Well, currently India ranks 77th
Okay, 77th out of how many?
out of 193. So, while India is not in the most vulnerable category, it's pretty clear that building disaster resilience is really crucial, and that's where the concept of disaster risk reduction comes in, or we can call it DRR for short. It's all about taking a proactive and preventative approach to minimize the impact of disasters before they even occur.
Okay, so shifting from like a reactive approach to a more proactive approach,
Exactly.
which makes a lot of sense. And I'm already starting to see how this ties into something like the Sendai framework, which is a key topic for the UPSC GS3 exam. Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar with this, could you give us a quick rundown of what the Sendai framework is all about?
Absolutely. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction is essentially a global blueprint. It was adopted back in 2015, and it's meant to guide countries in their efforts to reduce disaster risk. It's a 15-year plan running from 2015 to 2030, and it marks a significant shift from just simply managing disasters after they happen to actually managing the risk itself.
Okay, so it's like we said, shifting from reactive to proactive.
Exactly. And what's really important to note is that the Sendai framework addresses both natural and human-induced hazards. Think about things like earthquakes, floods, cyclones, but also things like industrial accidents or even pandemics. It recognizes that risk can come from different sources and that we need to be prepared for a wide range of potential disasters.
Now, India was one of the first countries to actually align its national disaster management plan with the Sendai framework.
It's right. India has shown a strong commitment to implementing the framework's principles, and it's already taking concrete steps to achieve its 7 global targets.
7 targets, wow. Can you tell us a little more about what those targets actually are?
Of course. So the Sendai framework, it aims to significantly reduce disaster mortality, the number of people who are affected by disasters, and the economic losses caused by disasters. It also focuses on protecting critical infrastructure and increasing the number of countries that have these national and local disaster risk reduction strategies. Enhancing international cooperation is another big one, and then also improving access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack, but it sounds like a very comprehensive and ambitious plan.
It is. And one of the key ways that India is working towards these targets is by analyzing disaster mortality patterns. They're really trying to understand why people are dying in these disasters and what can be done to prevent those deaths from happening. It's a data-driven approach that's really crucial for effective disaster risk reduction.
So it's kind of like figuring out the root causes and finding solutions.
Exactly. And another area where India is making huge strides is in developing national and local disaster risk reduction strategies. It's not just about a top-down approach, it's also about empowering communities to be prepared and to be resilient.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But let's talk about something maybe a bit more tangible. What are some of the concrete initiatives that India has undertaken that really showcase this commitment to the Sendai framework?
Well, one initiative that really stands out is the launch of the South Asia Geostationary Communications Satellite. Now, this might sound a little bit technical, but bear with me because it's actually quite fascinating. This satellite, it plays a vital role in improving communication and information transfer during disasters. Imagine being able to send real-time data about a cyclone's path or coordinate rescue efforts way more efficiently. That's the power of this technology.
Wow, that's incredible. It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but it's happening right here in India.
Hmm.
And it's not just about India itself, right? This satellite actually covers the entire South Asian region.
Right. You're absolutely right. India is not only addressing its own disaster risks, but also contributing to regional efforts in South Asia. It's a great example of how disaster risk reduction requires collaboration and knowledge sharing across borders.
So we've talked about the Sendai framework and some of India's initiatives, but how does all of this connect to the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs? Another crucial topic I know for UPSC aspirants.
That's a great question, and it's a connection that's often overlooked. The SDGs are a set of 17 global goals adopted by the United Nations to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. They cover a wide range of issues from things like poverty and hunger to education and climate change.
Right, I remember studying those in school.
Well, what's important to understand is that disasters can really hinder progress towards achieving the SDGs. Imagine a major earthquake, right? It destroys infrastructure, it disrupts education systems, it displaces entire communities, and that sets back development efforts by years, if not decades.
So it's like a domino effect. A disaster can unravel years of hard work towards achieving sustainable development.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to integrate DRR into development plans. We can't achieve sustainability without addressing the risk of disasters.
And how is India doing on that front? Are they successfully integrating DRR into their development plans?
India's definitely taking steps in the right direction. They're incorporating DRR principles into various national programs, recognizing that sustainable development and disaster resilience, they go hand in hand.
That's great to hear. So we've established that disaster risk reduction, it's not just about reacting to disasters. It's about understanding risk, building resilience, and integrating these principles into everything that we do.
Absolutely. And to make this maybe a bit more concrete for our listeners, let's dive into some specific strategies that India is using to build resilience against disasters.
Yes, let's get into the nitty-gritty. What are some of the practical things that are being done on the ground?
One strategy that's particularly relevant in a country like India, which is prone to earthquakes, is retrofitting existing buildings to make them more earthquake resistant. This is especially important in high-risk seismic zones where older buildings might not meet modern safety standards.
So it's like giving these buildings a much-needed upgrade to withstand the shakes and the tremors.
Exactly. It's a practical and a cost-effective way to reduce the potential for damage and the loss of life during an earthquake.
That makes sense. What about new construction? Are there strategies in place to ensure that new buildings are built with disaster resilience in mind?
Absolutely. Another key strategy is the development of what we call disaster-proof cities. This involves creating resilient infrastructure that can withstand the impacts of different hazards. It's about thinking holistically about urban planning and making sure that new development is designed with disaster risk in mind from the very beginning.
So it's not just about individual buildings, but it's about creating entire cities that are prepared for the unexpected.
Exactly. And this includes things like implementing risk financing schemes and disaster risk insurance.
Okay, now this is interesting. So it's not just about the physical infrastructure, but also about the financial mechanisms that can help communities recover and rebuild after a disaster.
You got it. Having those financial safety nets in place is crucial for building long-term resilience. It's about ensuring that individuals and communities and even governments have the resources that they need to bounce back from a disaster.
It makes a lot of sense. But let's not forget about something we touched upon earlier, the importance of early warning systems.
Absolutely. Early warning systems are crucial for disaster risk reduction. They give people the time they need to evacuate or to seek shelter or to prepare for an impending disaster. India has made significant strides in developing and implementing early warning systems for various hazards, including cyclones, tsunamis, and even flash floods.
So it's like having a heads up, right?
Yeah.
That allows people to take proactive steps to protect themselves and their loved ones.
Exactly. It's about empowering people with the information they need to make smart decisions in the face of danger.
Yeah, and speaking of empowering people, what about community-based initiatives? What role do communities play in disaster risk reduction in India?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Community preparedness is absolutely crucial. It's not just about the technology and the infrastructure. It's about the people, right?
Yeah.
Understanding their risks, knowing how to respond, and supporting each other during a crisis.
Yeah, for sure. It's about building a culture of preparedness at that grassroots level.
Absolutely. And India has been doing some really remarkable work in this area. One initiative that stands out is the Tsunami Ready Communities Program. We mentioned that briefly earlier.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how it works?
Right. So this program, it's spearheaded by UNESCO, and it sets out a clear framework for communities to assess their own tsunami risk, develop evacuation plans, establish early warning systems, and conduct regular drills. It's a really comprehensive approach that empowers communities to take ownership of their own safety. So it's not just the government telling communities what to do, but it's the communities themselves actively participating and leading the way.
Precisely. And India has two communities in Odisha, Venkat Raipur and Noliasahi, that have achieved this Tsunami Ready recognition.
That's fantastic. They must have implemented some really effective strategies to earn this recognition. What did they do? What did these communities do to become tsunami ready?
These communities, they've really gone above and beyond. They've established these clear evacuation routes. They've got safe assembly points. They've set up local warning systems, so things like sirens and public address systems to alert residents if there's a tsunami threat. And they've also conducted regular drills and awareness campaigns to make sure that everyone in the community knows what to do in an emergency.
That's incredible. It
Yeah.
shows that these communities aren't just sitting around waiting for the government to come and save them. They're taking steps to protect themselves. But let's talk about a different kind of natural hazard. Let's talk about drought. How is India addressing the risk of drought, which can be just as devastating as other disasters, especially for rural communities?
Yeah, drought's a significant concern for sure in India, and the country is taking kind of a multi-pronged approach to address this challenge. One interesting tool that they're using is the UNCCD's Drought Toolbox.
Okay, the UNCCD. Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar with that acronym, can you explain what that stands for?
Of course. UNCCD stands for the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. It's an international agreement that aims to combat desertification and mitigate the effects of drought, particularly in developing countries.
Okay, so it's like a global effort to tackle these land degradation issues.
Exactly. And the Drought Toolbox is this really practical resource developed by the UNCCD to help countries assess their drought risk and their vulnerability. It provides a set of tools and methodologies that countries can use to monitor drought conditions, develop early warning systems, and implement drought mitigation measures.
So it's like a toolkit for tackling drought.
You could say that. It's a very valuable resource that's helping countries like India take a more proactive and data-driven approach to drought management.
This is all incredibly insightful. I'm learning so much about how India is approaching disaster risk reduction in this holistic and innovative way. It's not just about reacting to disasters. It's about understanding the risk, building resilience, and using technology and community engagement to create a safer future.
You got it. And we're just getting started. There's so many other fascinating initiatives and programs that we could explore.
I know. I'm already looking forward to diving into more examples in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, let's leave our listeners with a thought to ponder. We've talked about these national policies and cutting-edge technology and community initiatives. But what role can individuals actually play in building a more disaster-resilient India? We'll explore that and more when we return. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring all of India's really impressive efforts in disaster risk reduction. From the high-tech early warning systems to community-based preparedness programs. But as we wrap up our deep dive, I want to bring it a little bit closer to home.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've talked a lot about the big picture, but what about the individual? What role can each of us play in building a more resilient India?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel like these issues are way too big for any one person to really make a difference.
Right.
But I think that's where we often get it wrong.
Yeah.
Individual actions, when you multiply them across a community, across a state, across a nation, can create a really powerful ripple effect.
Absolutely. And it all starts with awareness. The more you know about the risks in your own area, the better prepared you'll be. Whether it's, knowing the evacuation routes for your building or understanding how to secure your home during a cyclone, knowledge is power in this case.
Yeah, so step one is educating ourselves. But what comes next? How can we go beyond awareness and actually contribute to building resilience?
One really powerful way is through community involvement,
Yeah.
joining local disaster preparedness groups or volunteering for relief efforts or even just talking to your neighbors about these issues.
Right. Fostering a sense of collective responsibility, not just waiting for the government to handle everything.
Exactly. And, let's not forget about something as simple as having a disaster preparedness kit at home. Food, water, first aid, supplies, a flashlight. These basic items can be literal lifesavers in an emergency.
Yeah, it's like having insurance for your safety.
Exactly.
You might not need it every day, but when you do, you're going to be grateful that you have it.
Exactly. And speaking of insurance, another way that individuals can contribute is by considering disaster risk insurance. While it's still kind of a new concept in India, it can provide a really crucial financial safety net for families if a disaster does strike.
It's like taking control of your own destiny instead of just leaving it up to
For
chance.
sure. And let's not underestimate the power of advocacy. Engaging with local authorities, demanding better infrastructure, pushing for stronger building codes. These actions can create systemic change that benefits everyone.
So it's not just about protecting ourselves, but also advocating for a safer and more resilient society for everybody.
Absolutely. And let's be honest, even small actions like reducing our environmental footprint can contribute to disaster risk reduction. Climate change is a major driver of these extreme weather events, so every step we take to mitigate climate change is a step towards a more resilient future.
It's all connected. From individual preparedness to global climate action, every piece of the puzzle matters.
Exactly. And as we wrap up our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this one final thought. Disaster risk reduction. It's not just about surviving disasters, it's about thriving in the face of them.
It's about building a society that is not only prepared for the unexpected, but also capable of bouncing back,
Yeah.
stronger and more resilient than ever before.
Well said. So whether you're a UPSC aspirant or a student or just someone who wants to make a difference, remember that you have a role to play in building a more resilient India. And it all starts with you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into India's approach to disaster risk reduction. We hope you found it informative and empowering. And remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about these issues, the better equipped we'll be to create a safer and more sustainable future for ourselves and for generations to come.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay resilient.